Hello, YouTube. As I promised, I will continue reading Think and Grow Rich. Last time I was reading, we left off on page 54. I hope you enjoy it. I will continue. Thank you for listening. Having determined that he could hear the sound of my voice plainly, I began immediately to transfer to his mind the desire to hear and speak. I soon discovered that the child enjoyed bedtime stories, so I went to work, creating stories designed to develop in him self-reliance, imagination, and a keen desire to hear and to be normal. There was one story in particular, which I emphasized by giving it some new and dramatic coloring each time it was told. It was designed to plant in his mind the thought that his affliction was not a liability, but an asset of great value, despite the fact that all the philosophy I had examined clearly indicated that every adversity brings with it the seed of an equivalent advantage. I must confess that I had not the slightest idea how this affliction could ever become an asset. However, I continued my practice of wrapping that philosophy in bedtime stories, hoping the time would come when he would find some plan by which his handicap could be made to serve some useful purpose. Reason told me plainly that there was no adequate compensation for the lack of ears and natural hearing equipment. Desire backed by faith pushed reason aside and inspired me to carry on. As I analyzed the experience in retrospect, I can see now that my son's faith in me had much to do with the astounding results. He did not question anything I told him. I sold him the idea that he had a distinct advantage over his older brother, and that this advantage would reflect itself in many ways. For example, the teachers in school would observe that he had no ears, and because of this, they would show him special attention and treat him with extraordinary kindness. They always did. His mother saw to that, by visiting the teachers and arranging with them to give the child the extra attention necessary. I sold him the idea too that when he became old enough to sell newspapers, his older brother had already become a newspaper merchant. He would have a big advantage over his brother, for the reason that the people would pay him extra money for his wares, because they could see that he was a bright, industrious boy, despite the fact that he had no ears. We could notice that gradually the child's hearing was improving. Moreover, he had not the slightest tendency to be self-conscious because of his affliction. When he was about 7, he showed the first evidence that our method of serving his mind was bearing fruit. For several months, he begged for the privilege of selling newspapers, but his mother would not give her consent. She was afraid that his deafness made it unsafe for him to go on the streets alone. Finally, he took matters in his own hands. One afternoon, when he was left at home with the servant, he climbed through the kitchen window, shinnied to the ground, and set out on his own. He borrowed 6 cents in capital from the neighborhood shoemaker, smart boy, invested it in papers, sold out, reinvested, and kept repeating until late in the evening. After balancing his accounts and paying back 6 cents he had borrowed from his banker, he had a net profit of 42 cents. When we got home that night, we found him in bed, asleep, with the money tightly clenched in his hand. His mother opened his hand, removed the coins, and cried, of all things, Crying over her son's first victory seemed so inappropriate. My reaction was the reverse. I laughed heartily, for I knew that my endeavor to plant in the child's mind an attitude of faith in himself had been successful. Wow. His mother saw in his first business venture a little deaf boy who had gone out into the streets and risked his life to earn money. I saw a brave, ambitious, self-reliant little businessman who stuck in himself had been increased 100% because he had gone into business on his own initiative and had won. The transaction pleased me because I knew that he had given evidence of a trait of resourcefulness that would go with him all through life. Later events proved to be true. When his older brother wanted something, he would lie down on the floor, kick his feet in the air, cry for it, and get it. When the little deaf boy wanted something, he would plan a way to earn the money, then buy it for himself. He still follows that plan. Truly, my own son has taught me that handicaps can be converted into stepping stones, on which one may climb towards some worthy goal, unless they are accepted as obstacles and used as alibis. The little deaf boy went through the grades, high school and college, without being able to hear his teachers, excepting when they should loudly at close range. He did not go to a school for the deaf. We would not permit him to learn the sign language. We were determined that he should live a normal life and associate with normal children, and we stood by the decision, although it cost us many heated debates with school officials. Page 58. While he was in high school, he tried an electrical hearing aid, but it was of no value, due, we believe, to a condition that was discovered when the child was 6 by Dr. J. Gordon Wilson of Chicago. When he operated on one side of the boy's head and discovered that there was no sign of natural hearing equipment. During his last week in college, 18 years after the operation, something happened which marked the most important turning point of his life. Through what seemed to be more chance, he came into possession of another electrical hearing device, which was sent to him on trial. He was slow about testing it due to his disappointment with a similar device. Finally, he picked the instrument up and more or less carelessly placed it in his hand, hooked up the battery, and lo, as if by a stroke of magic, his lifelong desire for normal hearing became a reality. For the first time in his history, he heard hearing. God moves in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. Overjoyed because of the changed world, which had been brought to him through his hearing device, he rushed to the telephone, called his mother, and heard her voice perfectly. The next day, he plainly heard the voices of his professors in class. For the first time in his life, previously, he could hear them only when they shouted at short range. He heard the radio, he heard the talking pictures. For the first time in his life, he could converse freely with other people without the necessity of their having to speak loudly. Truly, he had come into possession of the changed world. He had refused to accept nature's error, and by the present desire, he had induced nature to correct the error through the only practical means available. Desire had commenced to pay dividends by the victory was not yet complete. The boy still had to find a definite and practical way to convert his handicap into an equivalent asset, hardly realizing the significance of what had already been accomplished, but intoxicated with the joy of his newly discovered world of sound. He wrote a letter to the manufacturer of the hearing aid, enthusiastically described